this menu. Hold that for me between you. You can hold it when you're chatting to me. Oh, goodness, what a day we've had here. Who wants to start? Talk to us, if you would, about whether Chequers is dead.
I don't think it's dead.
You hold it a little bit closer.
I will. Is that better? I don't think Chequers is dead, but I think the main thing the Prime Minister's got to do at this conference is just get through it. She's basically treading water. This conference isn't really about the overall negotiations with the EU. It's about making sure that she can put out a credible position on the stage, both on our Brexit policy and on our overall policy. And actually, I think what happened just before conference, where Salzburg summit, she got put a strong pushback. She was
humiliated.
Well, I think she was, but she was able to wrap herself in the flag afterwards and demand that the EU show some respect, and that's actually put her in quite a strong place now going into conference. I don't know if Ben would agree with that.
I think certainly that speech after she came back from Salzburg put a lot of people on a better feeling about the whole thing. Like, there was an element of patriotism and all that going on. In my constituency, 71% leave.
But you resigned as a result of the Chequers.
Of Chequers,
deal,
I don't agree with Chequers. I don't think, and I don't see how it gets through Parliament. Nobody seems to be happy with it. I think pretty much everybody in politics says not going to happen. I would like to see movement on it. Whether we'll see that this week, but I think the language in Dominic's speech today, the language is much more robust about us as a nation and being much more positive from that perspective, which I think will go down well.
Yeah, I think so. The Brexit Secretary, Dominic Raab, was saying today that Chequers isn't perfect. He was obviously a Leave campaigner, and he said, I don't like everything about this plan, but it is a plan. And I think what the Prime Minister should be saying a bit more of is, look, I'm flexible. If somebody else has got a different answer here, and I'm listening to concerns raised by people within my party on both sides, I just hear those concerns and empathise with them. But if other people have got different options, please bring them forward and sort of turn it over to the EU, but also say that she's not wedded to every crossed T and dotted I of the Chequers plan.
What are the sticking points for you then?
With Chequers, I just think actually if we don't deliver a Brexit that fulfils the reasons people voted to leave, that it doesn't deal with those issues, then we're not really doing it. We may as well not bother. Actually, I don't think people voted on the basis of a particular customs arrangement or any of that level of detail. But actually,
what do you think people were voting for? When you said 70% of your
71% of my constituents,
voted to leave.
Well, as I say, it's not about. I think it will specifically be this, that, and the other. But it was about actually leaving all of the jurisdiction. It was about not being within that sphere of European influence anymore and doing what we want to do, whether that's in trade or with our laws or our regulation, our immigration policy. And I just think clinging on to bits of EU membership in the way that Chequers seems to do doesn't fulfil that mandate. And I think there are alternatives on the table now.
Well, I think personally, I've got quibbles about individual bits of the Chequers plan, but ultimately what Chequers is trying to do is come up with something that isn't as close as the Norway arrangement, but isn't as far away as the Canada arrangement.
And something that the European Union will accept.
Yeah, and so far the European Union have pushed back, and at some level that's perfectly understandable. But I think when you talk to people in the EU, and I run a think tank, we spend a lot of time talking to European diplomats and European negotiators, I don't think they have a very clear answer themselves. And what the Prime Minister is saying is also true, that the EU has offered a free trade deal like Canada's, but they've only offered that to Great Britain, not to the whole of the country. And no Prime Minister, she said, and we heard the same thing at the Labour conference, will accept a situation where Northern Ireland, part of the UK's territory, is carved off into a different sphere for customs and regulation. So that's why we're in this impasse.
As far as leaving the European Union without a deal at all, Ben, the suggestion is that our economy will absolutely be 8% worse off, falling off a cliff, basically, if we don't sign some sort of deal before we leave. What's the likelihood, do you think, of us getting a deal, given where we are today?
It's difficult to say. I think we need to
agree. We've only got
this.
6 months to go.
I know. We need to agree this transition period, I think, which buys a little bit more time in terms of the future relationship. Obviously, if we agree the withdrawal bill and put all that forward about putting that transition in place, it gives us the time then to negotiate a future.
Really,
it is. Well, in a way, it means that there are certain things we need to agree before we leave in March. But actually, that future relationship, we then have 18 months to move to, even if it is to no deal, if we've got 18 months to make the right preparations for that, to give business that time to adapt to that, then it won't be the end of the world. What we don't want to see, and I don't want to see even as an ardent flag-waving Brexiteer, is actually I don't want to see us just at the last minute crash because we haven't put something together. If we've got that transition, it gives us the flexibility, I think, to kind of play hardball with Europe a little bit.
But the problem is we're not going to get that transition unless we can reach an agreement on the Irish backstop. And at this point, the EU is saying absolutely no. I'm worried, and I think the economic consequences of no deal, I think the UK could easily could easily manage that. It might be a little bit bumpy, but I think most of the predictions are pretty far-fetched. But more broadly, the security
These are government predictions, so these latest figures.
We were looking at it as well at Open Europe, and I think a lot of the overall predictions have been exaggerated. And there are things that the government can do, steps that we could take to make sure that we can mitigate some of those damages. And we heard again from both the Chancellor and the Brexit Secretary today with some of that policy. But I think if we fail to reach an agreement, this will be a profound problem for the whole of the continent. This is the second biggest economy in Europe, the biggest defence and security player, which is exercising a right afforded to all EU member states under Article 50 in the treaties of the EU to leave the EU in accordance with their constitutional norms. That's what we're trying to do. And if we can't come to an arrangement whereby we can do that, that's a real crisis, and I think Jeremy Hunt was right to warn of that, and he took quite a bit of flack, but I think he's sending a very clear signal to the European side. You need to engage with this, you need to think very carefully about the consequences, and we might be trying to resolve the Irish border, avoid any hardening of it, but in trying to get that solution to fix the Irish border, the irony is that's preventing us from reaching a deal, and that may be the thing that leads to a hardening of the border.
I think when we talk about this kind of no-deal aspect, it's important to say I don't think there's any question of us not coming to some agreement on the vast majority of social issues, things like travel and visas and all this kind of stuff. We're talking really about the economic connection and the trade relationship. Things like international security, we will always cooperate with Europe and with everybody else. We're in various partnerships with people around the world. So I think really we're talking about that economic aspect. And it is important that we don't just end up in a position where at the last minute we can't pull it together and we've got no time to prepare for what comes at the end. But I do think British business and our society is kind of robust enough to actually adapt as long as we've got the time and that notice to be able to put things in place.
She had a bad conference speech last year, some of it her fault, some of it not, some of it the set builders. How important is it that she gets it right this year?
Well, I think, as you said, the expectations are going to be pretty low because she had such a bad speech last time. If the letters stay on the wall, she doesn't get given a P45 and her voice holds out, it's a triumph. And that, I think, is, but seriously, she does need to have a good speech. The party is very divided. I think we're seeing on Twitter and social media MPs on different sides tearing each other apart, tearing strips into her and her policy. At one level, this is what a hung parliament looks like when a party's trying to deal with a very difficult question like Brexit. But they also want to see a domestic vision as well. What's our plan? What's our response to the challenge of Corbyn that we saw in Liverpool last week? And that, I think, that's a tall task for her to deliver.
Well, I think from that perspective, actually, Brexit's almost the least important bit in an odd way. Obviously, it's this huge thing about our country, but as a party, what I want to see from this week, and what I have so far, actually, a lot of the discussion here hasn't been about Brexit. It's outside of the main hall. It's been about the positive domestic agenda. And for all of us as members of the Conservative Party, I think what we really need to pull together is in that post-Brexit world, what are we as a party, as a government, going to deliver for Britain and give people that kind of positive message about the future that has been lacking under this Brexit cloud for quite a while.
So we're going to mention the Spectre at the feast before we let you go, and I'm sure you know who I mean by that. He arrives.
Busy running through Wheatfield.
Yes, indeed. So he arrives tomorrow. He has not been very complimentary about the Prime Minister. How much of a threat is he to her?
I don't think it's an immediate threat, because I think the Prime Minister's actually put herself in a strong position as a result of her Salzburg speech. I think that at this stage, most people agree that changing leader, trying to change horse mid-race would be a huge mistake. But I think she needs to be careful. She needs to avoid doing what she's done previously, where she tried to humiliate Boris Johnson, even when he was Foreign Secretary, and make jokes about him and so on. I think she should address some of the substantive points. And as I said, say, look, I'm not wedded to every detail of my plan, and I understand that people are raising concerns in good faith, and treat it rather like that.
I think I absolutely agree about the leadership comment. It would be, and I think it would be perceived really badly by the country if we were to dissolve into that internal discussion about leadership at this point in time. So I don't think it's an immediate threat. Obviously, we all know Boris, and the way he puts himself across is very different and engaging in a different way, which I think is important that we have that in the kind of senior ranks of our party. I guess we'll see what he has to say tomorrow.
We certainly will. Will you go and listen to him?
I will.
I think I'm chairing an event, but otherwise I'll be there.
Good to talk to both of you. Thanks.